Well, hello there, and welcome to day 70 of A Film a Day with me, Jordan Woodley. Today, covering the new Netflix documentary Biggie, I Got a Story to Tell. This, of course, is in the one of numerous documentaries about and exploring the life of Biggie Smalls, Notorious B.I.G. This is a significantly more intimate documentary than probably has been done before. There's something quite personal about the way this is represented. If you're looking for A to B chronological story of who Biggie Smalls was, how he became successful, and then leading to his unfortunate death in 1997, then this isn't probably the documentary for you, because this is very much a documentary structured around the people around Biggie, and really the story of the way people who knew him experienced him, and how they were shaped by him, how they recognized him as he grew and changed as a person. And so the documentary jumps all over the place. It begins in 1995 at sort of the peak of his, when he was at that point sort of the king of New York. Then it jumps backwards, where it goes. It jumps forwards to his sort of his death and the impact he had, and then it jumps back to his youth. It's all over the place in terms of structuring, but I think the point of it is that we're given a more intimate insight in who he was. This documentary is structured around interviews with his best friend D-Rock, who sort of came up with him, grew up with him as a child. As children, both went into hustling and dealing on the streets. And then as Biggie got successful, D-Rock sort of didn't, was still having to live the intense life that they had before, but he got to see his friend come up and then sort of live past a friend who mattered to him a lot. Or you have his mother, Mrs. Wallace, who, her perspective is really interesting on it. The idea of this Jamaican immigrant single mother who was a teacher, who sent her boy to Catholic school, and in spite of all of her efforts, he still ended up this street hustler, gangster type, because unfortunately that was the trappings of the time. That was just almost the inevitability of being working class black from that period, by the sounds of it. That if you're poor enough and you're running around the same kind of circles of people, D-Rock talks about the fact that that Biggie went to a school where they were made to wear uniforms, and he wished he could go to a school where they made uniforms, because the school he would go to was all about wealth and power, and who had the best bling and shoes and that kind of thing, and he hated the fact that but then conversely, Biggie really wanted to live the glamorous life, and again, being essentially quite poor, he felt he wanted to live that kind of lifestyle where he could be rich, because I think there is a trap in that. And I think, like a lot of music bios of that time, of rappers and R&B artists and just black artists of that time, a lot of them are going to be very, very similar. And so, but from his mother's perspective, he doesn't come across as this hustler. In fact, the sort of criminal aspect of his life was almost kept away from her for a long time, because she really I've often said that, in recent years, how, in spite of our close relationship with American media, there is a trip. There's a trap that we fall into in Britain where we think that the culture of America is closer to our culture than it actually is. And in fact, when you take a step back and look at the analysis of how the American system works and how people are, there isn't hardly anything similar, to the point that a good quote of it is that America, if it wasn't for the fact we spoke the same language, wouldn't. It's only by the fact that we speak the same language that we treat them similar. We try and find that similarity between our culture and theirs. However, saying that, as someone whose grandparents came from the Caribbean myself, briefly during this documentary, I did see a connection with this guy who grew up in New York, and when it was talking about his relationship with his family and the way they spoke about him in these interviews, I did see that there was a section where, you know, you have these old Caribbean people sat there talking about this young man, and very briefly I had a flash of recognition, which was quite a shock to me. But what I like, I suppose, about this documentary is the fact that it talks about his musical influences, and his musical influences aren't hip hop of the previous generations. That is in there, but his influences came more from rock, country, reggae, jazz. He had an uncle who really wanted to push him into jazz. And so as an artist, you can see where the brilliance of his ability to construct and compose comes from, which is about understanding music on an intuitive level, that he would listen to a sample of a completely different genre and then want to restructure it into something that we would recognize as a 90s hip hop masterpiece. And I think that really demonstrates Biggie's ability and his craftsmanship when it comes to music, and the brilliance of his skills. And so I found that quite interesting. And there is that story to be told that, yes, his story is very similar to a lot of young men of that time, but I think you get an interesting perspective on someone when you see it through the eyes of people who knew them and cared about them. And I think the merit of this documentary is the fact that you see this character who has lots of layers to him, you know, and it's in the nuances, like I say, the musical one, or, you know, his relationship with his mother, and how he tried to live up to her, but also tried to shield her, and that kind of relationship. I think the documentary really gives you this intense character study that you wouldn't get. You get purely from the fact that you get to speak with people who were incredibly close to him, back from, you know, friends and family from when he grew up, right through to Puff Daddy or P. Diddy, you know, as he broke into the music industry and that side of things. So you do get this complete portrait of a man who is desperately trying to be something important. And initially, you know, the nature of the documentary, he loses his way a bit, like one would expect, where he becomes more about how the best way to make money and getting to gang life and selling rocks on the street and that kind of thing. And then as he gets into music, and the fact that he's very, very skeptical about the music industry and whether he'll get in, but as he gets in, it becomes about him wanting to really get into music and making music and building entrepreneurships outside of music. And the tragedy comes in the fact that he really was almost out of the danger of his lifestyle. He was so close, and of course, you know, he was starting to build something for his daughter and for the people around him, and then his life was lost at only 24. And that's another tragedy, is the fact that, and the remarkable thing is the fact that he is 24 and so much happens to him in such a short span of his life. But that's, I suppose, the nature of these kinds of stories, that someone burns brightly, has so much potential, and you look at it and you think, isn't it tragic that we never got to see what that could have shaped into? But saying that, you do get this really interesting portrayal of him, and I do think that's what makes this documentary stand out. I do think, like I say, it's not a perfect documentary. I do think, with all the jumping around and the fact that it's more about people's perspectives than it is about telling a coherent narrative, it does lose its way a bit. The jumping back and forth means unless you already know his story, it's hard to necessarily follow what happens to him in a clear way. And sections are just completely minimised or almost skipped over, especially when it comes to the confrontations he had with Tupac, and both the effect of Tupac's death and his own. Although it does talk quite intimately about things like death, the death of his friend Big Ol, his mother's cancer, who does recover, but the impact of his mother's cancer and the death of Tupac are all very important things in his life, and they go into great detail about how these things changed him as a person and changed him as an artist. But as I say, the problem is that it does jump backwards and forwards a lot, and because it's a lot of different people's perspectives, you kind of have to have a grip of who he is before watching the documentary. This is not the intro to Biggie documentary. This does make me want to go back and look at the Nick Broomfield, who of course whose previous documentary, The Leader, His Driver and His Driver's Wife, I watched, and watch the documentary Biggie and Tupac to see how that explores both of these men and the time period leading up to their deaths. But it would be nice to do a side by side with this documentary. But I do think this is interesting, and I did get a really unique perspective on Biggie that I hadn't seen before. So yeah, I do think it's worthwhile, and I think if you're interested in music of the period and you're interested in character studies and what the lifestyle was like of that time, I do think this is a worthy documentary. Anyway, you can, if you could, please like this video and go back and watch my back catalogue of now up to 70 films that I have discussed. If you could, please do like, share and subscribe all of my videos if possible, but do subscribe to the channel. And if you could follow me on Twitter at Jordan_Woodley. I post every day with the new films. Anyway, thanks for joining me. Take care.